Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 329 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we just have a few more things that we have to get set up, and then we'll be able to test our new reactor setup. Enjoy. The only other thing here is deciding when reactors turn on and off as a whole. And that will be done with these power switch latches here. So right now the factory is very full on accumulator, but we don't actually want it to be where the accumulator gets very low before the reactors turn on, because they have so much power output that we want the accumulators to be able to absorb some of that. But we don't really need to worry about that on an individual reactor basis, because if one reactor turns on, they're all turning on, just like this. That it's either all of these are on or all of them are off. We don't need to have logic for each one individually. So we're going to treat these reactors in the same way, where we just need to build the setups, and then from there, control them all at the same time. So, we have an idea of size, and the pipes would come from this direction, so it's either we rotate it to go up and down, or we find water that's on the left or the right, and just know that, you know, we've got 4 reactors here, but we would need a total of 24 of them, so we'd have to build this 6 times, so it would, you know, come out to like right here, so it would be a nice long line. So where do we go from here? Well, this is a pretty convenient place. We can come out like this. A lot of this area here is reserved. Like, this area is kind of reserved in case puffers get bigger and more complicated. Plus, if we did 6 of these, it might actually bump into the bus here. Although I don't think the bus would ever get that far. But hey, you never know. So this area is kind of reserved. This is kind of reserved for science, but it won't really go that much further because we only have gold science. This is a weird spot, but it's not even next to water. So I'm thinking this will work fine. Some setups may go up here, like the limestone that we had to move. And it looks like the uranium setup has stopped because it filled up. Yep, with our 101 of uraniums, and it has 18,000 of the 238s, and it never found a 234. But it does seem like putting a line of reactors like right here and just kind of extending out like this would work pretty well, and leave a little bit of space here just in case some machines need to go there. But certainly none of this stuff would expand upwards anymore. So yeah, I'm thinking like somewhere in here. Well then, let's see here. Well, we copied our limestone setup. Let's do this, since we're probably not going to build that, since we have the other setup with the beacons on it. But we can just grab this, and it looks like it probably will tile pretty well with itself. Because yeah, if we do this, the wires still connect, the underground pipes still connect, and that's kind of what it would look like. And it's symmetrical on both sides, and then another line of them could be right here as well, so they would share the pipes. It's interesting how it says it's overlapping, but they're T-junctions. I think that's probably just an error with this. I'm sure it would place fine. So we need 6 setups, although we could put them side to side. There's probably no reason to do so, just because the density isn't high enough. And that is actually one other thing we'd want to think about when we place this, is what happens when we have potentially more reactors. Because this setup could get twice as big if we put twice as much uranium processing down. So that is actually a consideration, but still, that might be the best spot unless we kind of come down here. There are certain parts of the factory that haven't been used in a long time, but funny thing is if you put a bunch of reactors out here, suddenly it will take up a bunch of space. I mean, we could put them here, but then we're not really taking advantage of layering those pipes down. And it potentially might not actually fit, although I think it barely would if we put it here. That's an interesting idea, to just slap them down here. I mean, the solar panels are there, but I don't actually really expect to add any more solar panels from here, because we already have quite a lot of them, and they seem to do, you know, a pretty good job. But nonetheless, if we placed more, they probably would be there. There's advantages, and there's disadvantages. So we could probably just use this as a guide. And I think these zones, the size of it is based on the size of the power pole, not the size of the logistics zone. What that means is we probably can tear some of this out, like right in here. So one thing we do need to remove are trees and rocks and things. And robots are immediately coming to help. Oh yeah, we did also need to put like a parking space on here for robots that are delivering fuel cells. Let's, how about just pull out these ones for now. That will create a gap, and then we can kind of place these reasonably close to the water, but not right up there. So how about like that? And although we would have a power latch here, to start with, we probably just want to connect it anyway, because it takes power to make power, which is the funny thing, is that this setup will not run until it actually has electricity first. So we kind of need to start it up so it's generating power, and then after it's generating power, it will be able to move the inserters under its own power. It's so fun to watch this, since the robots are a lot faster now. It's quite exciting. And the issue here is this is set up to run on 72,000 water a second, which is the quantity of water that we would actually need to get into this duct for this thing to even work. So kind of the question here is, how do we do that? Well, we can do a little bit of a test here by building an offshore pump, our best version, and having these super fast ones. Definitely helps. So we get 3,600. So we would need 20 offshore pumps to max out this pipe. But you never quite get that speed because of pipe limitations. But we can put this to the test by putting the pump down and then having it go straight into a storage tank with no pipes at all. And if we do that, it's kind of like having a stack inserter going directly into or out of a chest, that you just get higher throughput. So it's kind of hard to tell. Sure seems like it though. I mean, the thing is green. As far as I can tell, it worked, but this might be something we'll just have to test to see, to make sure it can hold up with the water, and if not, well, I guess it's good that we're not stacking them next to each other, so in the event that these pipes aren't enough, we can just have a second line of pipes here, and have like one half of these use a pipe over here, and then one half like use one that's a separate one. But that kind of shows you that you more or less get your output with this. And then, to also avoid pump limitations, we can have an input duct right here. So it will pull it in as fast as it needs to. And then it would just go to where it needs to go, and you see how fast it goes. Or you barely see anything. It's like you click it and it's done. So I believe it when it says that it's 72,000. We'll just have to see. And they would need to be positioned in such a way where the pipes could connect, because they're in these groups of two, that if you spaced them out by one, the pipes wouldn't quite align correctly. You'd have to do some short pipes and stuff like that. So if possible, we'd want to try to space these out, but let's see what we can get. So it's kind of weird placing these as it goes, because it doesn't give you that indication. Just kind of placed them in there with some landfill so I don't have to spend forever trying to figure out exactly where they can go. Reason why I placed 7 of them there is that our current setup, 6 groups of reactors based on these numbers. So 6 times 7,200. It's actually 7 of them, because we also have to remember the 234 reactors as well. Then we divide that by 3,600. We get 14, and since there's 1 group on each side, then that's 7. So for now, we can test this, and we'll just need to remember we're going to need more water. One advantage of using the better heat exchangers, I switched it back for this, but it uses less water. So even though the power output's the same, it takes up less space and it uses less water. So in that sense, you should use them if they're available. Just lets the setup be denser. But for now, we can go with something like this. So that's 7 of these here. And we have to make sure they're all lined up just right. Ducts are cool, but they're also just kind of weird in the sense they don't do all that pipe stuff that Factorio pipes do, which really makes you miss the Factorio pipes with just how well they work. And then we're going to need the T right there. So something like that. I only want to build this one reactor for now because I want to test it out first and see how it works before we just build a bunch of them. Not to mention that for one reactor to turn on, you basically need to have power already So we kind of still need to do this. And it's a little dark spot in the middle here. So maybe we can do something like that. Okay, that's water on one side. Well, to make it completely the same on both sides, we probably should just extend this down. Do something like this. Am I going to run out of landfill? Yep. Oh yeah, we still needed to have charge ports and somewhere for the robots to park. How about we put those on top and some charge ports underneath. So we need another one of these, but now it should easily line up. We need to power all these, but actually doing it with a substation would be a lot easier than using the individual wires, so let's do that. So we hit that, and it seems to fill up pretty quick. And yeah, about 3.6k a second. It's kind of hard to tell, but it seems to be doing that. Certainly the ducts filled up like instantly, so they're good. And all the water got into each heat exchanger. So let's put another one down there. They fill up very quickly. Okay. Well, I would like to test this reactor first to make sure that it works. And part of testing that is having some space in the accumulators. Right now the system is being filled up to maximum, but we probably want to change that logic. But another thing we can do is just request the fuel cells to get in here. So it'll be 235, and how much would we want? I mean, 50 is an awful lot of fuel cells. I'm sure that's actually going to be fine. And I guess it needs to be a buffer chest. So here they are, picking up, and it's going to take a little while to fill this up. We'll have to see if this number makes sense, but fuel cells are pretty valuable, so you don't necessarily want to make a whole bunch of them. But it's going away. And in fact, it seems like it's limited by the speed of this inserter. Kind of. It certainly could stand to be faster. Probably doesn't need it in the sense of average speed, but let's see if we can get our about 6.5 out of that. Here come the fuel cells. The inserters are not swinging. It's still only the two of them, and plus, with the power switch set off, the reactor will never turn on until we're ready for it. We are going to want to give this some time. And there we go. Now that runs at a speed of 8, but 8 is actually faster than that belt. So let's upgrade it to red. Yeah, the machine is super fast at making fuel, so I don't think we're going to have to worry about that. Okay, we're going to need space in the accumulators. So we need to figure out all of the new settings for the different latches. What are all of our fuel sources? At least the ones that would have different latch settings. Well, first, it's our two fuel types. That our reactor that runs on 234 should always turn on, because that 234 is basically a byproduct fuel. The 235 does go into some stuff, so we would want to bias it towards the 234. So that's two reactor types on its own. Plus, if we built some plutonium reactors, those would also need to have logic as well. I'm not sure if they would be higher or lower than these. They'd probably want to be lower because it would be a last resort. So like plutonium is the last thing that turns on, and then maybe 235, and then 234. So we'd have 3 settings. Plus, we don't want to look at our other power sources. We're technically delivering wood blocks here, but I probably won't burn those anymore. But certainly we would have one setup that would basically just burn fuel, whatever that fuel ended up being. So whether it was the white fuel blocks, the gray ones, which we're not actually making, even wood ones if we wanted to do that again, or even biter orbs, they all work the same. And the logic is the same. We would definitely want to upgrade this setup later, but I kind of want to get the nuclear reactor set first, and then we can come back and upgrade this. Basically all of this, it's basically the same setup. It doesn't need to have different logic. There are other setups, like our propane burner here, but this is a byproduct burner, so byproducts always burn. So they don't have a latch at all. This is why the latches exist to begin with, to make sure that the accumulators are never fully charged to allow some space for these byproduct burners. And they're scattered all over the place, like hydrogen burners here. But the idea is the same. They all turn on when they're needed. So this is one of our setups. And, you know, there's other byproduct burners that basically never run that are scattered around here, but that's the big one that we don't want to worry about. And the other one is solar. Our giant, massively packed solar farm here, that if we don't have any logic on the solar panels, they will just fill the accumulators to maximum. So we actually don't want that, so there's always some space for the other things in the factory. So we have 5 on and off conditions. The plutonium setup, which we don't have yet, let's say runs when the accumulators get below 15%, and then let's say the latch unlatches at like 20 or something like that. But I'm curious about the low level specifically. How about 30% for uranium-235, 45% for uranium-234, 60% for our massive burner setup here, and then the solar panels will try to get it to 75%, and they will turn off at 80. So in other words, that last 25%, oh, there's a little empty spot right there. There we go. Must have been filled in with landfill a while ago. That last 25% is just for the byproduct burners to fill up. So now we need to run around the factory and adjust these. That for now, since that isn't going to be connected by a latch, we don't have to worry about that. So we said that the burners should get a 60% on condition. So we'll set that to 60, and then it'll turn off at 65. And they're currently not connected, so not much to see. But the big one here is the solar panels. That by disconnecting them, that means that at least 25% of the accumulators will be available for our reactor test here. Because I don't want to build a bunch of setups to find out there's some problem, so I want to test one group of reactors first, and then go full scale when it seems like it works. So here's this setup, and it's trying to get it to 95% basically. So instead we'll set this to 75%, and then it turns off at 80. So now it disconnects. And our accumulators will very slowly discharge because the factory's fairly dormant right now, and we have lots of accumulator available. And there's actually one other thing we might want to do here. Because this setup takes power to bake power, that we have to have it connected to the factory to turn it on. And then once we have one of these, we can put the latch in. But the problem there is, what happens if a weird situation happens where the reactors get completely drained of all of their power, and then the factory's latch is open? Like, yeah, when the latch closes, they'll get power, but they won't actually be of a proper temperature. So the inserters will all swing, the temperature will go up, but when the factory needs the power, it won't actually be there. So we may want to have a separate fuel source just for the reactor setup. But then the problem when you do that is then when you connect it to the rest of the factory, it will send its power through. But we can kind of do the same thing where we'll do like an inversion of the latch. So to do this, we need to have a second power switch. One of them that does the opposite of what the reactor's doing. So we can actually kind of do this now. When we grab this, one of them needs to connect it to the factory. And is it connected on all sides? No, just this one. And it's using this wire here, so yeah, probably can do something like that. We're going to need an accumulator in here to actually control it, and yes, it will be completely messed up because it won't be synchronized with the rest of the factory, but eventually it will be. So it'll still work in the end. And this is going to be the 235 reactors. Thank you. So the on condition of these is going to be below 30% and off at 35. And when this gets here, we can hook up to it. But it won't really charge properly because it's not going to be synced up with these, so it's actually going to be kind of messed up for a while. I don't know if there's an easy way to synchronize it to the rest of the factory. Actually, we might be able to, because we have signal transmitters now. So are all of these basically the same? Have they equalized? I'm just kind of looking at the bar there and seeing if they look the same for all of these accumulators. They probably do, because the way that they synchronize is the power of the factory gets to 100%. And then everything becomes the same. So we could synchronize that by cranking it up, but we don't even need to bother. We can just pick one of these and use a signal transmitter. So let's do that. Let's do the arithmetic combinator to pull A out of it. And of course that signal isn't here yet. What if we use this little space right here, since it's kind of too small for accumulators to fit into? And since accumulators are always connected to the factory, it means we don't need to really worry about exactly where we put this. We'll just do that, and all the accumulators are going to be the same, so one connects. So now the signal should be being delivered up here, and we can actually just kind of check that where it is. 65 going down, and the reason why it's going down like that is because it's nighttime. The solar panels are latched on, but since they're not going to produce any power, it needs to get to 59, and when it does, these should hook up here. But it's interesting that this accumulator that it's connected to is not exactly the same as everything else, so it is not synchronized, which is funny. So let's do another receiver, just so we can use the same signal, so everything is unified on how it operates. So there we go, signal's coming through. Now we can connect it to that. Remove that one, and now it's going to work correctly. It briefly turned on here, but all of them are still going pretty hard. So is there another latch here somewhere? Oh, just the wire connected. Gotta watch out for that. This one right here connected all the way to that one. There we go. Is it going to shut down now? Yes. Okay, well, that made the accumulators charge up a bit, but they're going to go down again, and you see these burners turning on here. Those are probably these byproduct burners, yeah, for propane. Seems to be working. We've got a bit of a buffer, but this means now the reactor is properly hooked up. So now we need to produce some power, and we have different ways of doing it, but how would we want to? Well, we need a fuel source, and this is kind of just a backup. It's probably never really going to run. We can actually make this quite simple, where this just connects. I don't know, honestly, let's just do just a straight up boiler 3, and it'll request some fuel blocks. Of course, it takes power to make power, so I'm going to use the short poles. Well, they're still pretty long by comparison, but that will only connect to here, and this will just be its power source. However, we also need to have a latch, but we can just use the output of this, and good thing that it's a green wire, which means we can kind of hop it along. But this turns on if green is more than 0. So the inverse of this is that this will connect if the green is actually 0. But we have to be super careful about how we do this here. So we'll send the green wire output along there and say that it has to be 0. So then we do this. That's connected. So they should invert themselves. So when one of them is on, the other one's off. And also one disadvantage is that the robot zones are disabled when this thing doesn't have any power. But it's also kind of the situation where it takes power to make power. So actually, because of that, we might want to use a burner inserter. When was the last time we used one of these? And it's considered junk at this point, but There we go. This network should just be this. And it is, and in fact, it doesn't have enough power to run everything. I wonder what it's actually short on. Oh, it's just charging the robochest. But also the zone expanders just take up a lot of power, I guess? Oh no, they're charging up as well. I was like, that was weird, but forget, they actually need to charge themselves. They have little batteries inside. So now that it's charged up, it's holding plenty of power, and yeah, it kind of glitches a little bit, but it doesn't have to be perfect. The only purpose of this is to just make sure these inserters can swing. And now that the solar panels have turned on, they're charging us up to that 75% again, but I think we're pretty good to test this here. So the only thing preventing this from turning on is our power switch. So if this works correctly, when we flip this on, every inserter will swing one time to insert fuel into the reactors. But then once it has fuel, this combinator that requires the fuel to be 0 will turn off, and then they will not get a second swing. So, fingers crossed that it all works. And there we go. They swung. This is filling up again. But now we only have 3 on conditions because of the fuel. And oh yeah, that's the other thing we needed to do here. The stack size needs to be 1. Luckily though, these extra ones don't matter too much. There was a bit of an error there, where these are going to run out of fuel. But because this is a control reactor, they're all going to be controlled by that one. So that was just an error of that. So they're not getting the neighbor bonus anymore, but once these run out, they should all swing at the same time again. And there we go, 1 swing. They're filled up with just what they needed. And you can see that all the reactors aren't exactly the same, but they don't need to be. So the reactors are about 270, and down here, it's like 120. If you look over here and I hover over this, it says the fuel percentage in the reactor. So it's about to swing. There it goes. They're continuing to warm up here. We need 465 to start generating power. And robots are taking those used fuel cells away. We'll deal with those later. But we're about to get another swing, but also we're about at the minimum temperature necessary to start making steam. So swing. So you can see how you can hear it where they turn off for about a split second, but that's the sacrifice you make to only having 1 fuel cell in there at a time. You could have it where it only has 2 fuel cells at a time, but it still kind of wouldn't work right. But the temperature, at least at the input here, is at 400, while the reactor is 520. So having this set to 600, I'm not sure if it'll work because of the temperature differences. But also, it's warming up from cold, so it might operate a little differently. But we're at the minimum temperature of steam here. So now those are running. And the temperature will slowly make its way back here. So this is basically the reactor's minimum temperature, and it was about 600. So 600 might be too low here. We might want it closer to like 650. But also we can see what temperature does it stop at. Because here we go. You see now they shut off because they're above 600 degrees. So they're no longer going, but it drops below 600. And then they go again. So this stuff up here was running. Kind of just barely, but it was. Let's see what it stabilizes at. Because the main thing is we want to make sure this doesn't get to 1,000 at any point to have maximum efficiency. So it fills up again, and now the reactor's cooling down because that heat is getting turned into steam and equalizing. But they're producing very little power. So this might be the point at which it equalized. And this is still connected, producing power, so it's kind of fighting with the reactor here. But it's not actually connected to the network, so the only thing that they're powering are some robot zones. Which, now that it has power, the robot zones cover everything again. And I think we might have reached a balance point here. Because now the temperature on the end here is increasing, so the next test will have to be when the factory is low on power. And our junk warehouse now has those used up uranium fuel cells, which makes sense because we don't have anywhere for them to go yet, but now it is primed and ready. The only thing it's waiting on is the battery charge to get low enough. So in this case, it actually needs to get below 30%. And it pretty much never will. Not as long as we have these fuel blocks available, because they have kept us stored up. But the repository is almost below 100,000 now, so it's not going to be that much longer. But what this means is that it should automatically turn on when we need it. The next step from here is to expand the setup to include all of the reactors that we need, and then we can reprocess the spent uranium fuel. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later.